She found out her husband was in business class while she sat in economy with their kids. Welcome. Remember to subscribe and activate the notifications. Enjoy. With the kids settled in their seats, Laura began to worry when her husband was nowhere to be found and the plane ready to take off. Laura was used to juggling, from early morning school runs to late night work emails. Her life was a constant balancing act. Today was no different. As she stood in the airport terminal with Emily tugging on her arm and Jake complaining about the wait, Laura was doing what she did best, managing. This vacation to the Maldives was supposed to be a chance to unwind, a break from the relentless routines of everyday life. But even now, as she tried to keep the kids entertained while waiting to board, she could feel the familiar tension knotting in her stomach. Jonathan had insisted on this trip. He had painted a picture of idyllic beaches, crystal clear waters, and family bonding moments. It sounded perfect, a dream vacation. But as they waited to board the plane, Laura couldn't help but notice Jonathan's absence. He had been behind them in line, taking care of some last-minute details, or so she thought. As the line dwindled and the last of the passengers boarded, Jonathan was still nowhere to be seen. Laura settled Emily and Jake into their seats in the cramped economy section. She stored their carry-ons, double-checked their seatbelts, and handed out snacks. As the flight attendants prepared for takeoff, Laura's concern turned to irritation. Jonathan was still missing, and she felt increasingly isolated, managing the kids alone. Her mind raced, wondering where he could be. She searched the entire plane, determined to find her husband. When she finally spotted him, her heart sank. Behind the business class partition, there was Jonathan, comfortably reclining in a luxurious seat, a glass of champagne in his hand. The contrast between the serene, spacious business class and the cramped, noisy economy section was striking. Jonathan barely reacted to her presence. For him, it was perfectly normal to have booked a business class ticket just for himself without bothering to tell her. The hurt and betrayal in her eyes were unmistakable. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about what it symbolized. Jonathan had chosen comfort over his family, prioritizing his own needs without a second thought. He had taken for granted that Laura would manage, as she always did. Returning to economy, Laura's thoughts were a storm of confusion and hurt. She settled back into her seat beside Emily and Jake, forcing a smile for their sake. Her children's innocent questions hung in the air, but she had no answers. The realization that Jonathan's behavior on this flight was just a symptom of a much deeper problem began to dawn on her. His career, his success, his comfort. These had always come first, and now Laura was beginning to see how much that had cost their marriage. Midway through the flight, the plane was hit by unexpected turbulence. The sudden jolt sent trays and cups clattering, and the fastened seatbelt sign flashed on. Laura gripped the armrests, her heart pounding, as the plane shook violently. She reached out instinctively, holding Emily and Jake close, trying to calm their fears despite her own rising panic. In business class, Jonathan felt a surge of fear as the plane shuddered. His first thought was of Laura and the kids. He needed to be with them, to make sure they were safe. But the flight attendants quickly restrained movement in the cabin, insisting everyone remain seated. Jonathan was stuck, unable to reach his family. For a moment, the reality of his choices hit him hard. If something happened, he would be separated from them, sitting alone in the luxury he had chosen for himself. When the turbulence finally subsided and the plane steadied, Jonathan's heart continued to race. The sense of helplessness he had felt was unsettling. He had always prided himself on being a good provider, on ensuring his family had everything they needed. Yet in that moment of fear, all he wanted was to be with them, to protect them. The luxury and comfort of business class seemed insignificant compared to the safety and closeness of his family. By the time the plane landed in the Maldives, Jonathan's initial resolve to make things right had begun to fade. The fear and guilt he had felt during the turbulence were being overshadowed by his justifications. He convinced himself that his choices were reasonable, that he deserved comfort for the work he did. But a small, nagging voice in his mind told him that something was slipping away, something he couldn't afford to lose. Laura, meanwhile, felt the impact of the flight lingering long after they had disembarked. As they made their way to the resort, the children's excited chatter filled the air. But Laura's thoughts were miles away. The turbulence had shaken more than just the plane. It had shaken her confidence in her marriage. Walking through the beautiful surroundings of the resort, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that her marriage was on a path she couldn't turn back from. The villa was everything Jonathan had promised. Sprawling rooms, stunning views of the turquoise ocean, and every luxury one could imagine. It was the kind of place that should have felt like paradise. But for Laura, it felt strangely empty. The events of the flight weighed heavily on her, a constant reminder that something was deeply wrong. As she unpacked their bags, Laura watched Jonathan wander out to the private deck, his phone already in hand, likely checking emails or catching up on work. The children's excitement was a sharp contrast to the tension between their parents. Emily and Jake ran from room to room, their laughter echoing through the villa. Laura forced a smile as she helped them settle in, trying to match their enthusiasm. She didn't want them to sense her unease. This was supposed to be a happy time, a chance to make memories, and she didn't want to spoil it. But every time Laura looked at Jonathan, the resentment bubbled up inside her. His casual demeanor, the way he acted as if nothing had happened on the flight, only made things worse. He had apologized in passing, but it had felt empty, more of a formality than a sincere acknowledgement of her feelings. Now, as he lounged on the deck, sipping a drink and enjoying the view, it was clear that Jonathan didn't think there was anything wrong. That evening, they had dinner at one of the resort's beachside restaurants. The setting was beautiful, with the sun setting over the ocean and the sound of waves gently lapping at the shore. The children chattered excitedly about the day's activities, but Laura found it hard to focus. She kept glancing at Jonathan, hoping he would show some sign of understanding, some gesture that he cared about the impact of his actions. Instead, he remained distant, absorbed in his own thoughts, occasionally glancing at his phone. As they ate, Laura's mind drifted back to their early days together. She remembered how Jonathan used to be attentive, always putting her first, always wanting to be close to her. But somewhere along the way, that had changed. His career had taken center stage, and Laura had been left to manage everything else. She had accepted it for the sake of their family, convincing herself that it was just a phase, that things would get better. But now she wasn't so sure. The flight had been a wake-up call, showing her just how far apart they had drifted. The next few days passed in a blur of activities. Jonathan filled his time with golf and spa treatments, activities that kept him apart from the family. Laura found herself spending more and more time alone with the children, taking them to the beach, playing in the pool, trying to create the family memories she had envisioned. But even in the most joyful moments, there was a shadow of doubt hanging over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was missing. Laura tried to engage Jonathan in conversation, to bridge the gap that had grown between them. She wanted to tell him how she felt, to make him understand the pain his actions were causing. But every time she brought up the subject, Jonathan brushed it off, changing the topic or making excuses. He didn't want to fight, he wanted to enjoy the vacation. Laura's frustration grew, a knot of anger tightening in her chest. One afternoon, as Laura sat on the beach watching Emily and Jake play in the surf, she found herself thinking about what she wanted, what she needed. She had always put Jonathan and the children first, sacrificing her own desires for the sake of their happiness. But now she wondered if that was enough. She loved her children more than anything, but her marriage was becoming a source of pain rather than joy. The life she had built with Jonathan, once full of promise, now felt like a series of compromises. Laura realized that the turbulence on the plane had shaken something loose inside her, something she had been ignoring for too long. The fear she had felt during those moments of chaos was more than just fear for her safety. It was fear for her future, for the future of her family. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. She needed to find a way to make Jonathan see what was at stake, to make him understand that they were drifting apart, and that if they didn't do something soon, they might not find their way back. As the sun set over the ocean, casting a warm glow over the sand, Laura made a decision. She would find a way to talk to Jonathan, to make him listen. She couldn't control how he would react, but she knew she had to try. For the sake of their family, for the sake of her own happiness, she needed to find a way to bridge the growing distance between them. The vacation in the Maldives ended, leaving Laura with more questions than answers. The beautiful surroundings had done little to soothe her growing sense of discontent. Jonathan's continued detachment throughout their trip had only reinforced her fears. Back home, the familiar routine should have been comforting, but Laura felt a lingering unease. Each day seemed to blend into the next, a blur of responsibilities and duties. She managed the children's schedules, took care of the house, and went through the motions of her own work, all while trying to ignore the ache in her chest. Jonathan slipped back into his work with ease, as if the vacation had never happened. He buried himself in emails, meetings, and phone calls, spending long hours at the office or working from his study at home. He was physically present, but emotionally absent. Laura could feel the distance between them widening. She had hoped that the vacation might bring them closer, might give them a chance to reconnect. But it seemed to have done the opposite, highlighting the chasm that had grown between them. Laura found herself thinking more and more about the life she had imagined for herself. She had always believed in the fairy tale, a loving husband, a beautiful family, and a life filled with happiness. But reality had proven to be far more complicated. She loved her children deeply, and she was committed to being a good mother. But her marriage felt like a slow suffocation. Jonathan's relentless focus on his career, his disregard for her feelings, had eroded the bond they once shared. Laura felt like she was losing herself, becoming just another piece of Jonathan's perfectly organized life. One afternoon, as she was running errands, Laura decided to stop by a local coffee shop. She needed a break, a moment to herself. As she waited in line, she glanced around the cozy interior, her thoughts drifting. It was then that she saw him. Michael. He was sitting at a corner table, a book open in front of him, his face partially hidden by his hand. Laura's heart skipped a beat. Michael had been a close friend in college, someone she had shared a deep emotional connection with. They had lost touch over the years, their lives taking different paths, but seeing him now brought a rush of memories. Laura hesitated for a moment, then approached his table. Michael looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to recognition. They greeted each other warmly, and Laura felt a sense of comfort in his presence, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. They began to talk, catching up on the years that had passed, sharing stories of their lives, their careers, their families. The conversation flowed easily, the way it always had. Michael's voice was soothing, his words thoughtful. He listened intently, his eyes focused on her, and Laura felt truly seen. As they talked, Laura found herself opening up about her life, about her marriage. She spoke of Jonathan's distance, his focus on his career, and her own feelings of isolation. Michael listened without judgment, his expression filled with understanding. He offered words of comfort, reminding her of the strong, vibrant person she had always been. Laura felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Michael represented a world of possibilities, a path not taken. She found herself wondering what might have been, what could still be. They exchanged numbers, agreeing to meet again. Laura told herself that it was just friendship, a chance to reconnect with someone who had once been important to her. But as she walked back to her car, her thoughts were filled with Michael. He was a reminder of a different time, a time when she had felt free, unburdened by the weight of expectations. Laura couldn't ignore the excitement that bubbled up inside her, the sense of anticipation. She hadn't felt this alive in a long time. Laura and Michael began to meet regularly, their conversations growing deeper with each encounter. Michael became a confidant, someone Laura could talk to about anything. He understood her frustrations, her fears, in a way that Jonathan never could. He offered a different perspective, challenging her to think about what she truly wanted from life. Laura found herself drawn to him, not just for the comfort he provided, but for the possibility of something more. As their meetings continued, Laura felt a growing tension within herself. She knew that what she was doing was dangerous, that she was playing with fire. But the pull of her emotions was strong, and she found it increasingly difficult to resist. Michael represented everything that was missing in her life: excitement, passion, emotional connection. He was a stark contrast to Jonathan, who seemed to grow more distant by the day. Jonathan had become a stranger to her, a man she once loved but now barely recognized. Laura's thoughts became a battle between heart and mind. She knew she had to think of her children, to consider the impact her actions would have on them. She had built a stable home, provided them with a secure life, and she didn't want to disrupt that. But her own happiness, her own needs, were calling to her. She felt torn between the life she had chosen and the life she desired. The internal struggle left her exhausted, her emotions swinging from hope to guilt, from longing to fear. Michael, sensing her turmoil, offered his support. He told her that she deserved to be happy, that she shouldn't have to sacrifice her own well-being for the sake of appearances. His words resonated with Laura, echoing her own thoughts. She knew he was right, but the decision was not simple. She had made a commitment to Jonathan, to their family, and she didn't want to betray that. Yet every moment with Michael felt like a step closer to the person she wanted to be. The tension between her responsibilities and her desires grew with each passing day. Laura found herself looking forward to her meetings with Michael, planning her week around them. She felt alive in his presence, her worries fading into the background. Michael made her laugh, made her think, made her feel in a way that Jonathan hadn't in years. The connection between them was undeniable, and Laura knew she was on the edge of something that could change everything. The day came when the unspoken finally became reality. Laura and Michael crossed a line that couldn't be undone. The affair began, bringing with it a mixture of joy and guilt. Laura felt a rush of emotions, a sense of freedom and passion that had been missing from her life. But beneath the euphoria, there was a gnawing sense of betrayal. She was deceiving Jonathan, hiding the truth from him, and the weight of that secret bore down on her. As the affair continued, Laura's thoughts were consumed by Michael. She found herself comparing him to Jonathan, imagining what life could be like if she chose a different path. Michael represented the emotional fulfillment she craved, the excitement of a journey yet to be explored. Jonathan, on the other hand, was stability, safety, a known quantity. Laura knew that Jonathan would never change, that his individuality and career would always come first. He was a good father, but not the partner she needed. Laura's internal conflict reached a breaking point. She knew she had to make a decision, to choose between the comfort of familiarity and the risk of something new. Her thoughts returned to her children, to the life she had built for them. They deserved a stable home, a life free from turmoil. Laura realized that her happiness was important, but so was their well-being. She couldn't tear their world apart for her own desires. In a moment of painful clarity, Laura made her choice. She would end the affair with Michael, choosing to stay with Jonathan for the sake of her children. She knew that her marriage would never be perfect, that she would have to find her own happiness within its confines. But she was willing to make that sacrifice, to put her children's needs above her own. It was a choice made with her brain, not her heart, but it was the choice she believed was right. Laura met Michael one last time, her heart heavy with the decision she had made. She explained her reasons, her need to protect her family, to provide stability for her children. Michael understood, though his eyes were filled with sadness. He promised to be there for her, no matter what, but Laura knew that things would never be the same. As they said their goodbyes, Laura felt a sense of loss, a mourning for the path not taken. Returning home, Laura tried to bury her feelings, to focus on her family, to find contentment in the life she had chosen. She kept her distance from Jonathan, maintaining the facade of a happy marriage. But deep down, she knew that things had changed. She had seen what could be, had tasted the freedom of being truly herself, and it was a longing that would never fully go away. Returning to the routine of daily life, Laura tried to find solace in the familiar patterns that defined her days. She threw herself into managing the household, caring for the children, and maintaining appearances. But the emotional upheaval from her affair with Michael left a lingering impact. Laura had made the decision to stay with Jonathan for the sake of their children, yet her heart was far from at peace. Jonathan, oblivious to the internal storm Laura was navigating, continued with his usual habits. He spent long hours at work, often coming home late, distracted and preoccupied. His phone was a constant presence, a symbol of the distance between them. Despite Laura's hopes that their vacation might have been a turning point, Jonathan's behavior remained unchanged. His focus on his career and personal interests seemed only to deepen, pushing Laura further into the shadows. As the weeks turned into months, Laura's feelings of isolation grew. The emotional connection she had once craved from Jonathan felt like a distant memory, replaced by a cold, practical partnership. They lived under the same roof, shared the same bed, but the intimacy that had once bound them was gone. Laura's thoughts frequently drifted to Michael, to the sense of freedom and fulfillment she had felt in his presence. She missed the way he listened, the way he understood her without judgment. But she had made her choice, and she was determined to live with it. Laura often found herself reflecting on the differences between Jonathan and Michael. Jonathan represented stability, the life she had chosen for her children. He was a good father, providing for them and ensuring their needs were met. But his inability to connect on a deeper level, his prioritization of his own comfort and success, had created a barrier that Laura couldn't breach. Jonathan's behavior was rooted in his upbringing, shaped by a father who had taught him that success meant individuality and independence. It was a mindset that had served him well in his career, but had left him emotionally distant from his family. Michael, on the other hand, had offered Laura the emotional connection she craved. He had awakened something in her that she had long buried, a desire for more than just the day-to-day survival of marriage and parenthood. Michael had represented an adventure, a journey of the heart. But Laura knew that chasing that adventure would have meant uprooting her children's lives, introducing chaos into their stability. She couldn't justify that choice no matter how strong her feelings for Michael had been. As the days passed, Laura focused on her role as a mother, pouring her energy into creating a loving environment for Emily and Jake. She found joy in their laughter, in their innocence, in the small moments of happiness that parenthood brought. Her children were her anchor, the reason she got up each morning and faced the day. They needed her to be strong, to be present, and Laura was determined to give them that. She found comfort in knowing that she was providing them with a stable home, a sense of security that they could rely on. Yet the emptiness inside her persisted. Laura knew that her marriage would never be what she had once dreamed it could be. Jonathan's inability to change, his lack of emotional engagement, left her feeling like she was living a half-life. She went through the motions, maintaining the image of a happy family, but her heart was no longer in it. The spark that had once defined her relationship with Jonathan had faded, replaced by a sense of resignation. Laura began to seek fulfillment outside of her marriage. She joined community projects, rekindled old friendships, and pursued her own interests. These activities gave her a sense of purpose, a way to channel her energy and find meaning. She found herself spending more time with friends, enjoying conversations that reminded her of the person she used to be. These moments were a balm to her soul, a reminder that she was more than just a wife and mother. Laura found strength in these connections, a way to reclaim a part of herself that had been lost. Jonathan noticed the changes in Laura, sensing the distance that had grown between them. He made occasional efforts to reconnect, suggesting dinners out or weekend activities with the children. But these gestures felt forced, lacking the genuine interest that Laura craved. Jonathan's attempts to bridge the gap only served to highlight how far apart they had become. He was trying in his own way, but it wasn't enough. Laura could see that he was still caught up in his own world, his own needs, and she no longer had the energy to bridge that gap. One evening, after another long day, Laura sat alone on the porch, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She watched the stars, her thoughts drifting. The house was quiet, the children asleep, and Jonathan was in his study, once again engrossed in work. Laura felt a deep ache in her chest, a longing for something she couldn't quite define. She had everything she was supposed to want: a beautiful home, a loving family, a successful husband. But the sense of emptiness, of something missing, wouldn't go away. Laura knew that the choice she had made, to stay with Jonathan, to end things with Michael, was the right one for her children. She didn't regret it, but that didn't make the sacrifice any less painful. She had chosen stability over passion, safety over adventure. It was a choice made with her brain, not her heart, and Laura wondered if she would ever truly be at peace with it. She had settled into a life that was predictable, secure, but devoid of the deep emotional connection she longed for. As Laura sat there, the realization washed over her. This was her life, the reality she had chosen. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't everything she had dreamed of, but it was hers. She could either spend her days yearning for what could have been, or she could find a way to make peace with what was. Laura knew that she had to find a way to create her own happiness, to find fulfillment within the constraints of her marriage. She couldn't change Jonathan, couldn't force him to be the partner she needed. But she could choose to focus on the positives, to find joy in the small moments, to create a life that was meaningful to her. Laura rose from the porch, a sense of determination settling over her. She would find a way to live with her choices, to make the best of the life she had built. Her children deserved a mother who was strong, who was happy, who could show them that life was about more than just surviving. It was about finding the light in the darkness, the beauty in the mundane. Laura would find that light for herself and for her children. It might not be the fairy tale she had once imagined, but it was real, and it was enough. Life settled into a new rhythm, a delicate balance of roles and responsibilities that defined Laura's days. She had become an expert at compartmentalizing, separating her emotions from her duties, focusing on what needed to be done rather than what she felt. Jonathan continued his routines, dedicated to his career, absorbed in the demands of his work. The occasional efforts he made to engage with Laura and the children were just that, occasional. They lacked the consistency and depth that Laura longed for, and she had long since stopped expecting anything different. Laura accepted this reality with a quiet resignation. Her decision to stay with Jonathan had been driven by practicality, by a desire to provide stability for Emily and Jake. She had chosen the path of least disruption, the one that ensured her children would grow up in a home that, on the surface, appeared whole. It was a sacrifice Laura had made willingly, even as it left her grappling with the unfulfilled desires of her heart. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and life moved forward. Laura found solace in the small moments, the laughter of her children, the warmth of the sun on her face during her morning walks, the satisfaction of completing a project. She learned to take joy in the simple things, to find beauty in the everyday. It wasn't the passionate, adventurous life she had once envisioned, but it was a life she could live with. The friends she had rekindled relationships with became her support system. They provided the emotional connection that was lacking in her marriage, offering a space where she could be herself without judgment. Laura cherished these friendships, finding comfort in the shared experiences, the understanding that came from being truly seen. She realized that while her marriage might not fulfill all her needs, she could still find fulfillment in other aspects of her life. Jonathan, for his part, sensed the shift in Laura. He noticed the way she had become more independent, more self-contained. He saw the way she poured her energy into her friendships, her community work, the children. Jonathan felt a pang of guilt, a sense of loss, but he didn't know how to bridge the gap. He had never been good at expressing his emotions, at confronting the deeper issues. His solution had always been to provide, to work harder, to ensure that his family wanted for nothing materially. The emotional void was something he couldn't understand, couldn't fix. There were moments when Jonathan tried to reach out, to rekindle the connection they once had. He would suggest a weekend away, a dinner out, an activity with the children. Laura would agree, going along with his attempts, but the old intimacy was gone. They moved through their days like partners in a well-rehearsed dance, their interactions polite, their conversations superficial. The deeper connection that had once bound them was lost, replaced by a sense of cohabitation rather than a true partnership. As time passed, Laura found herself thinking less about what was missing and more about what she had. She was grateful for her children, for the life they shared. She found contentment in the stability she had worked so hard to create. Her thoughts of Michael, once a constant presence in her mind, began to fade. The ache of what could have been softened, replaced by a sense of acceptance. Laura knew that her life was not perfect, that there were parts of her that would always yearn for more. But she also knew that she had made the best choice she could for her family, and that was something she could live with. One afternoon, while the children were at school and Jonathan was at work, Laura sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Laura thought about the journey she had been on, the choices she had made, the person she had become. She had faced heartbreak, disappointment, and the harsh reality that life was rarely what one dreamed it would be. But she had also found strength, resilience, and a capacity for love that went beyond her own desires. Laura realized that her happiness was not solely dependent on her marriage or her relationship with Jonathan. It was something she could create for herself through the choices she made, the relationships she nurtured, the life she built. She understood that her marriage would never be perfect, that Jonathan would never be the partner she had once hoped for. But she also knew that she could find fulfillment in other ways, ways that honored her own needs and the well-being of her children. That evening, as Laura prepared dinner, she felt a sense of peace. The tension that had once defined her interactions with Jonathan had eased, replaced by a quiet acceptance. They were not the passionate couple they had once been, but they were partners in raising their children, in maintaining a stable home. Laura could live with that. She could find joy in the life they had, even if it wasn't the life she had imagined. Jonathan came home, his face tired from a long day at work. He greeted Laura with a brief smile, his eyes reflecting the exhaustion that had become a constant part of his life. Laura smiled back, a genuine smile that came from a place of understanding. She no longer needed Jonathan to be everything to her. She had found a way to be everything to herself. As they sat down to dinner with Emily and Jake, Laura looked around the table, her heart filled with a quiet contentment. She had chosen stability over passion, safety over adventure, and she was at peace with that choice. She had learned to find happiness in the life she had, to accept the imperfections and embrace the moments of joy. Laura had discovered that true fulfillment came not from what others gave her, but from what she could give herself. The family finished dinner, the children chattering about their day, Jonathan listening with a distracted smile. Laura watched them, her thoughts drifting. She knew that there would always be a part of her that wondered about the path not taken, about the life she might have had with Michael. But she also knew that the choices she had made were the right ones for her family. She had created a life that was stable, loving, and filled with purpose. And that, Laura realized, was enough. As the evening drew to a close, Laura stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She looked up at the stars, feeling a sense of calm. The journey she had been on had been difficult, filled with moments of doubt and heartache, but she had come through it stronger, more resilient, more sure of who she was. Laura knew that life would continue to bring challenges, that there would be days when the ache of unfulfilled desires would resurface. But she also knew that she had the strength to face them, to find her own happiness, to live the life she had chosen. Laura took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that she had the power to shape her own destiny. Her life was not a fairy tale, but it was real, and it was hers. And in that reality, Laura found a peace that was more precious than any dream. Hope you loved the story. The next video is just a click away, so don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. A big thanks, and see you in the next story.